Welcome to the deep dive. We're here to dig into a pile of sources and pull out the key insights, basically giving you a shortcut to getting up to speed. Today, our mission is really to unpack the story of Netflix and its founder, Reed Hastings. We're using Netflix, the unscripted saga of streaming innovation, as our guide. We want to uncover, the surprising starts, those make or break moments, and the big lessons from how this one company just completely rewired entertainment. And the story, it doesn't kick off in some fancy boardroom. It actually starts with, well, a $40 late fee for Apollo 13 on VHS, believe it or not. Now, for most of us, that's just, an annoying blockbuster memory. But for Reed Hastings, that little fee wasn't just frustrating. It somehow sparked a whole revolution. It really set the stage for Netflix to challenge and then, well, dethrone Blockbuster.
Right, and that's such a great example of how sometimes the biggest innovations come from just personal frustration, not some complex market study. Hastings wasn't just trying to avoid his own late fees. He saw a flaw, in how the whole industry worked, an industry that had gotten maybe a bit complacent. It just shows how sometimes the biggest opportunities are hiding right there, disguised as these small, everyday annoyances millions of people just put up with.
So who is this guy, Reed Hastings? Seeing a revolution in a late fee. He was born Wilmot Reed Hastings Jr., Boston, 1960. And he wasn't your typical future media mogul. Early on, it was all about math, puzzles, a bit of adventure too. He studied math at Bowdoin College, but it was something after college that seems really key, really shaped his way of thinking. He spent 2 years teaching high school math in Swaziland with the Peace Corps.
Yeah, that Peace Corps experience seems absolutely fundamental. It pops up again and again when people talk about his approach. Living without, basic things like running water, taught him resilience, how to adapt, how to find really creative solutions. He actually said, when you've lived without running water, you stop being intimidated by hard problems. And that mindset, that came directly from those challenges. It clearly influenced how he tackled these huge business problems later on. After that, he came back, got a master's in computer science from Stanford. Then he co-founded Pure Software in '91, sold it later for, get this, $750 million. Huge amount. But what's interesting is, even then, people say his drive wasn't just the money. It was about building something people would, quote, truly love.
Right, that drive for something truly loved. So by 1997, that leads him to brainstorming with Mark Randolph. They're thinking about a new video rental idea, something without due dates, without late fees, without even having to go to a store. And the big aha moment, it sounds almost too simple. Hastings just mailed himself a DVD in a regular greeting card envelope just to see if it would work, and it did. It arrived perfectly fine.
Exactly. And the genius wasn't just mailing DVDs when they launched in '98. It was that whole package. DVDs by mail, yeah, but tied to a monthly subscription. No late fees, no due dates. Rent as many as you want, basically. It was one of those early subscription models that just completely retrained customers. To think differently about owning stuff versus just accessing it. It reframed the whole thing away from one-off rentals to this all-you-can-watch convenience.
That's a huge shift in thinking, especially when you look at who they were up against. Netflix was tiny, a real David versus Goliath situation with Blockbuster, which had, 9,000 stores globally? Massive. And then there's that famous story from 2000. Hastings actually goes to Blockbuster, offers to sell Netflix for just $50 million, and the Blockbuster CEO reportedly just laughed him out of the room.
Incredible looking back. And then, barely a decade later, Blockbuster's bankrupt. But the key insight isn't just that Netflix survived, it's how they did it. They won, fundamentally, by being obsessed with the customer experience. They built those personalized recommendations using algorithms. That taught people to trust Netflix's picks over just browsing shelves. It wasn't just suggesting similar movies, it was creating this feeling of really personal, curated experience. Plus, they had fast shipping from regional hubs, and that subscription model, well, basically invented binge watching before you even call it that. Blockbuster was just too focused on stores and late fees. They missed that the real business was convenience.
Okay, so they win round one. But then Hastings shows this, incredible foresight. By 2007, he realizes DVDs, even his successful DVD model, that's the past. Streaming, that's the future. Now, this was a massive gamble. You have to remember, broadband was still pretty slow for a lot of people. Getting content licenses from studios was super expensive. And honestly, were people really going to watch movies on their computers? It wasn't obvious. But he pushed ahead, launched streaming that year, and he had that famous quote, "If we don't cannibalize ourselves, someone else will."
Absolutely. And the strategic brilliance there was how proactive it was. He wasn't waiting around for someone else to disrupt him. He was willing to take apart his own successful business, his cash cow, for this unproven future. That willingness to disrupt yourself, even when it's painful, that's real transformative leadership, I think.
But, not every bet works out perfectly right away. 2011. Netflix makes what a lot of people still call its biggest mistake. They decide to split the company. DVDs and streaming. Two separate services. Streaming stays Netflix. DVDs move to this new thing called Qwikster, separate website, separate bills, separate queues, total mess.
The reaction was instant and brutal. They lost something like 800,000 subscribers almost overnight. The stock price just tanked, dropped 77%. But this crisis, it actually taught a really valuable lesson, didn't it? About being agile, about humility. Hastings came out, gave a public apology, and crucially, they killed Qwikster fast. It showed they could admit a mistake, pivot quickly, and start winning back trust. This is pretty rare for a big company.
So learning from that Qwikster mess, they make their next really big, bold move in 2013, producing their own shows, original content, starting with House of Cards, Kevin Spacey, Robin Wright. And this wasn't just, let's make a TV show. It was described as a billion-dollar gamble driven by data. They apparently used all their viewer data to predict that people would want exactly this. A political drama, David Fincher directing, Kevin Spacey starring. They built it based on what the data suggested.
And boy, did that gamble pay off. House of Cards wins Emmys. It proved, definitively, that streaming wasn't just competing with cable. It could be better, more prestigious. That success just opened the floodgates for all the other hits. Orange is the New Black, Stranger Things. It cemented Netflix as a real content creator, not just a delivery service.
And with that content, they really did go global. By 2016, Netflix was in something like over 190 countries, which is just wild when you think back to mailing DVDs in envelopes.
And they cracked that global expansion code by thinking globally but acting locally. That was the key. They understood they couldn't just push American shows everywhere. They had to invest seriously in local content, stuff that would resonate in different markets. You look at Money Heist from Spain, Squid Game from South Korea, Sacred Games from India. These became huge global hits. That strategy really worked.
But success attracts competition, right? So by the late 2010s, Netflix wasn't the only game in town anymore. You had Disney Plus, HBO Max, Amazon Prime Video, Apple TV Plus POTS, all these giants jumping in. Hastings reacted by doubling down again on originals, trying new things like interactive shows, remember Black Mirror, Bandersnatch, even pushing into mobile games. But the pressure was definitely on. Licensing got more expensive, growth started to slow down. Then came 2022, a real turning point. Netflix lost subscribers, first time in a decade. And the stock just cratered, down almost 70% in like 6 months. So Hastings makes two really controversial moves, cracking down on password sharing and launching a cheaper plan, but with ads.
Right. And some people definitely saw that as, desperation, or like they were betraying that original ad-free promise. But you could also see it as just necessary adaptation. The market had changed dramatically. Competition was intense. It really highlights that even for a company built on disruption, you can't stand still.
Yeah.
You have to keep evolving. Otherwise, you become the next blockbuster. Stagnation's the real enemy.
So what kind of leadership drives all this constant change, these big, risky bets? Reed Hastings is famous for this radical approach to company culture. It's summed up in the Netflix culture deck. Millions of people have read that thing online. It emphasizes things like freedom and responsibility, really candid feedback, paying top dollar to get the best people. Hastings had that blunt quote, "We're not a family, we're a team, and we hire the best players."
And that culture, that very specific, demanding culture, it seems directly tied to their ability to innovate and adapt so quickly. By creating an environment where talented people feel empowered, but also accountable, and where they're actually encouraged to challenge things. That's how they built this engine for making big, fast changes, even tough ones.
Okay, so let's boil this down. What does this whole journey from a $40 late fee to global streaming giant mean for you, our listeners? What are the big takeaways from Reed Hastings and Netflix? We've picked out 5 key ones. First, disrupt yourself. Don't wait for someone else to do it to you. Second, use data, absolutely, but trust your gut for the really bold moves. Third, own your mistakes. Admit them, fix them fast, like with Qwikster. Fourth, think global, sure, but act local. Understand different markets, invest in them. And finally, number 5, build a culture that doesn't just survive change, but actually thrives on it.
Exactly. And these aren't just lessons for tech or entertainment. They're pretty universal, really. They apply to almost any field trying to innovate, grow, and just stay relevant in a world that changes so fast.
So there you have it. Reed Hastings didn't just start a company. He fundamentally rewired how we watch things, how stories are told and shared globally. From that one annoying late fee to this massive cultural force. It's an incredible story of vision, guts, and that constant need to adapt.
Which leads to a final thought maybe for you to consider. Given Netflix's whole history of blowing things up and starting again, what's the next big shift coming in how we consume entertainment? And maybe more personally, what's the late fee in your world? What's that little frustration or overlooked problem in your daily life or your industry that might just be the tiny spark for the next big revolutionary change? Something to think about.